Hello, and welcome to the Angus and Pete Show. Views and opinions are strictly those of the presenters and their guests and should not be taken as advice. Goodness knows, we're not qualified to advise you about anything. Side effects may include mild amusement and occasional enlightenment with feelings of embarrassment, apathy, disappointment, and pity.
Welcome to episode 5. I'm Angus Pacey.
And I'm Pete Brown, and we are the Angus and Pete Show.
This is the place where you can listen to two guys chatting about the riveting world of customer engagement.
Customer engagement, otherwise known as call centre, contact centre, customer service, customer experience, CX, etc., etc., etc.
And if you want to know more about us, check us out on LinkedIn. So, Pete, what have we got in the post bag this week?
First things first, we got some really good feedback about episode 4. Remember episode 4 when we did a little bit of a review of CC Expo? And that really morphed into something much more focused on AI, because that was the theme of that exhibition in London. More than a few people said, we want to hear more about AI. We want to hear more about the why and the business side of things as opposed to the how and the technical side of things. Something not so positive here, I think, from Ken. Ken didn't say where he was from, which tells you.
Is he a grumpy bugger?
I don't know. He may be. He said that we're coming over a bit negative. Episode 1, we said that all analysts are corrupt. Episode 2, the industry doesn't know what words to call itself and we're confusing everybody. Episode 3, we can't trust resellers. And episode 4, we said that AI is just above the intellectual horsepower of everyone in our industry. Now, I think he's been.
I think that's a little bit harsh.
Yeah, he is a bit harsh, but you know, he's as you say, he's a grumpy bugger. I just want to say to Ken, first of all, I love this industry. I've been in this industry for a long time. It's been very good to me, and I've done my best to be very good to it. This podcast is all about picking out the bits and pieces that hide in the dark corners of our world that no one really talks about. How about you, Angus? Are you just in it for the advertising revenue, or is there a little bit more?
Well, we're getting bugger all advertising revenue, so we're not in it for that game. But I think there is absolutely a reality that if it was all working perfectly, we wouldn't have anything to talk about.
I hope that answers your question, Ken. And if it doesn't, I'm sure you'll be letting us know. We also had something interesting from Luke. Luke's from the UK, and he loves the business angle that we're taking on a lot of these subjects, particularly about selling business value rather than technology. He said, in his experience, that sales teams don't put enough effort into creating real personalised return on investment type stuff. So not the sales pitch, but the crux of the why a customer should really buy this stuff. And he's made us an offer, Angus. He sounds like he's a bit of a spreadsheet geek, a bit of a ROI waller. And he said he wants to help us to put some content together, maybe even be a guest on the show. Luke, you are on the guest list. We'll be in touch and we'll let you know.
Good call up.
And do you know what? I think this is also a nice segue into what we are going to talk about in this podcast. It's all about that procurement process, which typically manifests itself as something called an RFP. RFP. Angus, what does RFP stand for?
In the real world, a real fucking problem.
Real fucking problem. I thought, actually, it was request for proposal.
There are loads of 3-letter acronyms for that, and we said we weren't going to use them in the podcast, so let's explain them a little bit, because everybody will hear these at various times. You know, you've got RTT, or an invitation to tender. You've got RFQs, request for quotes. You've got RFIs, request for information. There are lots of them, and I think, you know, different vertical markets use different terms maybe, but in our world, you get that dreaded RFP.
So RFPs are a bit of an all-encompassing phrase for best practice structured buying process that clearly states the buyer's requirements and solicits a consistent, detailed response from a number of vendors. Yep, did I do it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of it.
Okay, so I've actually spoken to some buyers in the last few weeks, And I think I've distilled into some bite-sized chunks what the benefits are of an RFP, of a request for proposal process, not just a document, process. This is really looking at it from a buyer's perspective. The first benefit that they see is transparency. So it enables them to be transparent within their organisation about what requirements are, what outcomes are, what product needs and requirements they have. Really enables them to give a detailed description and a process around how they're going to evaluate each of the things that they require. So this a description, criteria, and a selection process that's nice and transparent internally and transparent externally. That's the key thing.
So this is the theoretical benefit, I'm assuming.
These are the theoretical benefits. Maybe they are the wished for benefits, but this is the list of expectation, and we all know expectation isn't always met in reality.
I mean, there's a Grand Canyon between expectation and reality.
Hold that thought. I think you're right. But let's just set the ground rules. Transparency, number one. Number two, competition. Buyers want to induce competition into their procurement processes. It's absolutely natural and it's expected on both sides of the house, buyers and sellers. So an RFP, a request for proposal, encourages competition amongst vendors if it's done properly, leading to not just better prices, but also optimized services, better value. That's the key thing, right? So transparency one, competition two. Then there's something about quality improvement. There's something about a request for proposal process helps to improve quality of the way that vendors articulate their requirements, but also improve the quality and probably the consistency of the way that vendors articulate their responses and solutions to those things. So with structure comes improvement in the quality of the outbound request for proposal and the inbound responses. And the final one, which is sometimes where expectation and reality diverge at a massive rate, is clarity.
Okay, that's a really interesting one, because I've never seen that one in reality.
The buyers I've spoken to have an expectation that RFPs help them to minimise misunderstandings between them and the sellers, the vendors, the resellers that they're procuring these products and services from. And they do that by establishing clear requirements and expectations. They're the perceived benefits of an RFP. I've got an idea of the process that goes alongside that. But tell me, what's your view of the RFP process? What actually makes this thing tick?
If you speak to people, they immediately say the RFP process is somebody issues a document, you spend weeks responding to it. You might get in 1 or 2 rounds of ask questions. You make a short list or you don't, and then you go into sort of final negotiations. But there's more to it than that. That's really just one view of it. There's more to that.
Break it down for us. Yeah.
There are about probably 8 steps to an RFP process that you can think about. So there's a lot more into it. The first one, what are the requirements? They need some needs analysis. The business has got to decide that they need to find solutions to a problem. So somebody's got to write down what are the requirements, what are the objectives, and that leads you right into step 2, where somebody drafts a vast amount of questions, puts them in an Excel spreadsheet, typically, or in Word documents with loads of legal requirements in there, loads of technical requirements. It should have timeframes in there, what the process looks like. Now, in theory, best practice, you should give the vendors a budget envelope so that they know what they're working in, because that plays into the business case within that environment inside the organization. In good RFPs, they document the evaluation criteria so people can really see how the business is thinking about evaluating this. And then you get a Word document that is typically 20, 30 pages long that says, how do you submit this and what are the criteria for it?
So that sounds like a big job. And in the world of customer engagement, you haven't just got a big job, you've got to do it with different communities. Right? We've got IT people, we've got contact center operations people, we've got line of business stakeholders, we've got the leadership in the business, and we've got finance, and we've got procurement, and we've got all of those constituencies milling about. I guess the expectation is that they're all involved in it. Who pulls that together? Is this where consultants help? Do consultants help in this process?
Yeah, this is where consultants kind of get drafted in, not always.
Yeah.
Get drafted in to kind of pull this together because they do this, they can advise, they're experts in doing this. Some of them not so much. And then put it into a document.
So we've got our stuff in a pile. We've got a big load of either real or digital documents, hopefully digital these days. I mean, goodness, surely people still aren't sending out 15 binders and expecting paper responses, are they?
No, I haven't seen the printed document for a while. However, I have seen salespeople and engineers in the vendors printing the stuff out so that they can read it.
Ooh, okay. The planet loves you.
Then the next stage you go into is publication and distribution. So that gets sent out to different vendors, different resellers, channel partners, everybody there. Now, account teams in these organizations might get them directly from the organization, or they publish this on some random portal that everybody can see it.
Okay. So sometimes the sellers are getting this stuff proactively, i.e. buyers are selecting a list of sellers to go to. Other times it's posted on a portal, and it's, if you find it, you can bid. If you don't find it, tough.
Yeah, and I think a lot of resellers, channel partners, and vendors actually go and see these RFPs for the first time when they are published on a portal. Now, it's akin to reading the newspaper.
But I bet you, Angus, that whilst we've spoken about, this whole process is about being fair and transparent, I know and you know that if a buyer's got a preference, their favourite, their incumbent, whatever, they make absolutely sure that those people know when this thing is being issued, what the timescales are for responding to it, and where they can find and sign up to being a part of that process. So we know that goes on, right?
I think in those cases, those parties that are preferred respondents have got a lot more information about that RFP long before it goes out. I think that dialogue is there, and that is quite often a two-way dialogue. Okay. If a vendor or reseller has an opportunity to contribute thoughts or suggestions or helpful guidance to the writers of these RFPs, they absolutely will take that opportunity
ahead of time. And once those RFPs have been distributed, then usually there's a place to ask questions and clarify before you get into the nuts and bolts of your considered and high quality response as a seller.
Yeah, sometimes it's one or two cycles that I've seen where you get an official document, an official format that you can submit your questions to by a certain date.
Yeah.
And then, that's on the timeline, and then they will come back to you with answers to those. And on best practice RFPs, everybody sees the questions and answers.
Because I love it. I love that, because you can tell. I mean, some of the questions I've seen, it's like, well, I don't know who was asking this question, but you haven't got a bloody chance because you haven't even read the document and you don't understand the basics. And also, sometimes the nature of the question gives you a clue about who your competitor is, or in some cases, how strong or weak a certain competitor is. You just need to read between the lines, but it's always worth looking at the questions and the answers from other vendors, because you can get a little bit from them.
You can glean quite a bit of information from that, but quite often, I'll tell you what also is that quite often the answers are more confusing than than the original requirements or the questions that they answered, because there's no context around them quite often. They just come out the blue.
On 2 occasions, I've been involved in RFPs, quite big processes, that have generated so many questions that the buyer has said, stop, we're doing it again. We obviously have not done an adequate job of formulating our thoughts and documenting our requirements. Thanks for the questions. We'll see you in 3 months' time. That's happened on a number of occasions to me.
And quite often you somebody's taken a list of features, put them into a list, comply, do not comply, which, to be honest, they could have answered themselves for the first, just by looking at a data sheet. They know full well whether you can or can't do things. Yeah. So, when they do that sort of thing and they specify that this is, if you do not comply, you're out. Yeah. That's where you start seeing choice shaping going on. They know what they want to buy. They're starting to shape and exclude people that they don't want involved.
So on that subject, do you know what? 2 of my favourite things to do when an RFP arrives. Number 1, open the documents and go straight to the properties and see who the authors were. Because I can tell you right now, I've seen more than a few that have been authored by another vendor. You can tell a lot from those properties. The other thing I love to do, pick some random paragraphs, maybe around features and functions of technology, cut and paste and stick it into Google. And very often you get taken to a specific vendor's website. So once we've got the document, we then have to submit a response.
Yeah, so you get given a time period to answer them. Yeah. And people that haven't seen these in reality, these can be 300, 400, 500 single line questions, which takes a considerable number of people to write that response. And then what you do is that you just upload it into something, onto a portal, or you email it to an address or something like that, and then they go quiet.
Right. So we asked a few people for feedback before this episode, and the one thing that came across above all else when it comes to submission and the response times was this: why do buyers think it's a good idea to send out an RFP 3 weeks before Christmas, or 2 weeks before the school holidays, or just before Easter weekend? What are they doing? I just don't get it. They're not motivating any seller to go the extra mile. They're just pissing everyone off and showing that they don't really understand what this is all about. Have you seen that? I see it a lot.
I've absolutely seen it, and I was told a couple of weeks back when I was in the Middle East that they know that a very large customer is about to issue an RFP, and they know it's going to come a week before Christmas. Now, I'm going to sit on the other side of the fence quickly, because I have sat and issued RFPs when I was playing product manager.
This is why I'm asking you, Angus, because if it's down to pure devilment and just
it's not.
Okay, what's the strategy?
What's
going on?
It's not always pure devilment and just being mischievous. The logic that goes behind this, and I think this is something that collectively buyers and sellers need to think about how you mitigate this one, is that the team's always under pressure to do stuff. They know they're going off on leave, so they issue it out to the vendors or the resellers to respond to, with the expectation when they come back, they will have the responses and they can then crack on to evaluation. So essentially, there's no dead time in their diaries. Now, that's kind of the motivation behind that one. I've heard this many times from procurement people and that sort of stuff, is pick windows so that you don't have to sit on your hands doing nothing, waiting for responses. But the flip side of that is the quality of responses can absolutely be jeopardized by who's available to answer on it.
I think buyers need to wake up and smell the coffee, because if the boot was on the other foot, they wouldn't like it. And guess what? Once we've made our submission and they're in evaluation, how many buyers have actually stuck to their own timetable? They're cracking the whip to get vendors to respond on Christmas Day, and yep, we're going to make a decision and award contract by the end of January, and here we are in April, still waiting for them to get their shit together. It's like, come on, it doesn't feel fair sometimes. It's a real world, but if you walk in each other's shoes, you might actually get some of the answers to making this process A, more efficient, and B, more productive for everybody. There, I said it.
People eventually, when they run out of people, they just start inventing it.
Right.
Because they know it's not a legal contract. It's just a bunch of responses, and all they're trying to do is get through to the next round.
So we've got our submission back in. We've touched on evaluation and the amount of time it takes. It feels to me, you know what, a lot of buyers massively underestimate the amount of work they need to do once those submissions come back, particularly those that thought it was a great idea to send their RFP to every man and his bloody dog without actually thinking about who it was going to and why it was going there.
So you've got two or three outcomes that happen when you go too broad with these sorts of things. One, if you've got explicit scoring criteria, you've got to go and create a scoring sheet for each one of those submissions.
Right.
And that's going to take you a lot longer than you thought. Or you get, which I have definitely heard about explicitly from a customer, you get the unlucky vendor selection criteria, where
Go on.
They take all the submissions that come in, they pick out the two or three that they know or the ones that they want to win anyway, and then they just delete all the other submissions and say, sorry, you didn't make the cut. You're unlucky, and I don't want to do business with somebody who's unlucky.
Right. Or they get a big heap of stuff that they never imagined in their wildest dreams they would have to read through, and now they're looking at ways to justify who they go with. So what do? They get our friend the Magic Quadrant out and say, right, who's in what box here? How can we justify binning some of these others? That's what goes, right? So if you're going to give sellers the opportunity to do a good job in responding to these RFPs, they need time, and buyers need to give themselves enough time and think about what that means when it comes to the evaluation part.
Put the shoe on the other foot and see exactly what they'll do. Is what you're asking reasonable? And I think, once you get through that evaluation phase, you then get into final down selecting, negotiation, you get into contract signing, implementation. But I think, the detail around these, I think we can unpack in another episode, definitely, because there is loads of this. This is a huge topic.
Okay, so objectivity.
Dream on. These things are rigged 9 times out of 10, and everybody knows it. To your point, go and take some text, Google it, and you can see who the precursor is. Right. And I think also the other thing which we call out, and we need to talk about this, consultants can be, let's not say are, because some of them aren't, can be a real problem when it comes to objectivity.
Right, okay.
And I think that's a topic in its own right.
Yeah.
So what's the takeaways?
When you look at what buyers could do to motivate better, more effective responses from sellers, don't just put a feature list out with no business context, no clear objectives. Tell the sellers what you're expecting, what you're hoping to achieve, and the why you're doing this, because you'll get a much better quality of response. Don't send it out to every man and his dog. One, guess what? Sellers talk to each other, and if they know it's gone everywhere, you've got a reduced chance of A, getting the quality of response that you want, and B, getting the number of responses that you want, or certainly the number of responses that you want from people that you want to buy from.
That's true. That's really true. People assume that all these respondents are compartmentalized. Everybody knows everybody in the industry.
We spoke about vendors and resellers and distributors, and they all know each other. Understand that. The other thing is about sending it out to a huge number of potential respondents. You're making your life difficult further down the line, because you've got to then sit there and you've got to mark them and evaluate them and go through this in your process. You're making your lives difficult. So do a little bit of focusing up front. We've spoken about stupid timescales. So put yourself in the other person's shoes and you'll get the answer. Buyers who then miss their own timelines after submission. So if you're going to miss dates, let people know why and let people know what the adjusted time scales are and help people to stay motivated. And the final thing is effective dialogue during the process. Dialogue makes the world go round. If you're not regularly communicating with sellers through the process, telling them where they are, being open and transparent, then people turn off very quickly. And just because someone has responded to an RFP makes absolutely no guarantee that they're going to end up wanting to sell it to you. So a buyer is as much on show as a vendor in this process.
I think I'd add something to that one is that if you're doing that sort of engagement and Q&A phase, do it verbally and in written format, not just one.
So this is a big subject. We've established that. I think we need part 2, maybe part 3 or 4, so that we can actually start to break this down and maybe look at what buyers can do, some very specific things that buyers can do to solicit the responses that they want from sellers, and the things that sellers can do to make sure that they're doing the best they can for themselves and for the buyer and really maximising their opportunity of a win.
Cool. So we're going to be back next week with episode 6. In the meantime, follow the Angus and Pete show on LinkedIn for all the latest news, notifications, and if you've got some feedback, message us directly.
Absolutely. Keep communicating. Keep the postbag full. You know that the show's available on all your favourite podcast platforms. You're listening to it. Tell your friends to listen. Like it, subscribe it, share it. Help us to spread the word.
Before we go,
yes,
it's Joke of the Week.
I have a joke. And unbelievably, it's an RFP joke.
No, there's no ways. Nobody does jokes about RFPs.
Well, I think you'll find that I do. I am the joke meister. Are you ready? Are you ready for the RFP joke of the week?
Here we go.
Why don't RFP responses ever tell good jokes? Because they take forever to deliver a punchline and it's always open to interpretation.
Oh my God. You need to go and work for a Christmas cracker company, Pete.
Maybe I do.
Cheers, Pete.
Cheers, Angus.
Thanks for tuning in to the Angus and Pete show. Remember, it's based on the personal views and opinions of the hosts and their guests. If you're feeling aggrieved or litigious, take a chill pill. There's already enough stress in the world. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform for more episodes. We'll see you next time. Oh, and tell your friends.